She liked science as a kid, or?
No, she was on the sales side.
Yeah, but she got to be.
Yeah, she and her husband had a small business. She started out working for the phone company and sort of morphed into that. So, and then my brother's a banker. He's retired too, but he's like, I never really liked banking. I'm like, you spent 40 years in it.
It's okay.
So he was good.
Well, good. Well, I'm going to get started in a minute because we are delighted to be here today at the beginning of Women's History Month. And I'm Carla Hayden, the Librarian of Congress, and in that light, I must say I'm the first female to be a Librarian of Congress since 1802. And I'm delighted to be here talking about women in Congress, and this is the 117th Congress, and as you can see from our title, it's Diverse Voices Making History, because the person we're starting with, and we'll be joined by two of your colleagues in the House who are busy voting, but right now I have the really great pleasure to hear from Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia. Now, in full disclosure, I got a chance to see the senator in West Virginia, and I visited, she had me visiting, and she went from presenting to constituents about environmental issues, all types of things, to going to the local public library and sitting on the floor doing story time with children in that library that she helped to build. So thank you for being here, because your history and how you got to be here is something.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And it's a joy to be back in the Library of Congress in person. And it's wonderful to be with you in person, Dr. Hayden. We started together because of my responsibilities on the Appropriations Committee when you were, and also on the Rules Committee, and you were at that time interviewing for the job or testifying, and you very gracefully, as you ascended, came to West Virginia on one of your first visits, and we loved that. That library, we need to have you back, because that library now is under a major renovation.
Yes.
And it's going to be totally modernized, same building, but it's totally modernized, and it's going to be a real, it always was an architectural landmark in our city. It was the old post office, but now it's meeting the 21st century challenges of your libraries, and as you know, that's a little bit different. So my pathway into becoming a senator, and I am the first woman senator from the state of West Virginia, is through the state of West Virginia. I'm a native-born West Virginian. My parents met in college at West Virginia University. My father's a native West Virginian, and my mother was born in Miami, Florida.
Oh.
1926, yes. So they met at the university. And my father then, after his service in the war, became a public servant himself. He ran for House of Delegates, Congress. So we went back and forth to Washington, D.C. when I was a young girl, where we went to school half the year here and half the year in West Virginia. I don't know how my mother did this, but or how we did it, but it was just sort of the norm back then. It's changed a lot. And so then, as I was looking at my professional career, what did I want to do? I thought, well, I'd like to be a doctor. And then I worked in a hospital. And then I decided maybe that's not what I want to do. So I did a couple other things, became a career counselor, worked in education, and then I stepped out to raise our 3 children, to the point where then I was watching what our local House of Delegates, our local governing bodies in West Virginia were doing. And I had this thought, like, well, I can at least do that. You know, I can do that as well as. And I had such background of going to parades and listening to speeches and watching current events that both of my parents had given their all in this, because my dad then ascended to become the governor of West Virginia. So I had all of that experience watching it firsthand. And the first thing I learned when I put my hat in the ring for my very first race as a House of Delegates is, this is not as easy as he made it look. And from then I was local office, Congress, and then now into the Senate.
Now, then your mother was the First Lady of West Virginia.
She was very much a partner with my father. She worked hard in the areas that she cared about, which was literacy and reading, but also mental health, I think about that now because I just had a conversation before we came over here, how important mental health has become during this pandemic and how we're falling short in a lot of areas. And I thought, my mother was really on the cutting edge of becoming a real advocate for mental health services, and this is in the 60s and 70s. And she was always right there with my father, very active, had her own persona as well. But I'd say she was a lot more gracious than my dad, so she probably attracted a different constituency in some ways, which helped him.
And that helped him. So she was the first lady, but also she did contribute to what you later thought was, how could he do this? Well, she helped.
She did. She did.
So now in your role, and it's like flipped.
It's flipped.
You're the person.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because, Speaker Pelosi has sort of the same path because she stayed out for a while, raised her children. Her dad was in, I think, mayor of Baltimore, very active politically, and then she became active herself. And I think it was watching, people ask me, why did it really, what resonated with you that you saw your parents do and that made you want to get into this? And a lot of people think it's the big things. Well, I can create more roads, or I can create the university research, or things of this nature that you can do. But it's really the small things. It's helping that one family adopt a child from out of the country that can't have children, and they're having trouble with their immigration. It's nominating the young man that goes to West Point, and you go to Afghanistan, and he's flying your helicopter. So these are, I get really chills about this, but those are the things that just, I think when you wake up in the morning, and it doesn't always have to have a happy ending. I think sometimes it ends up in a sad way if you've lost somebody serving and you're able to, help the family in some way. So it's the small ways that you can really impact in a big way people's lives. That's what really excites me.
And also when there are like natural disasters or things happen, that you were able to bring the aid and help with that.
We had a big flood in 2016, and that was a big part of what we did. We helped a lot of people, and that's probably the most recent tragedy that we've had in our state. We've had some coal mine tragedies that are equally as tragic.
Right, so a range of issues, and still you were really the people at that library, and I'll never forget it, they knew you, they were showing the drafts and the plans for what you're talking about, and you were telling them that, so the range of what you do.
Well, I wondered when they knew me, is that the same mother that used to come in with those 3 wild kids and check books out and let them run wild in the library?
They probably remember.
They probably were thinking that, yes.
So that balance then of being I mentioned your grandmother.
Yes, 7 times.
7 times, and then you have your responsibilities here.
I have a very supportive husband, and as I saw with my parents, it's a team sport, and for us it has been, and that has been made it easier for me. You have to learn how to say no. I'm sure you find this in your own life. You have to learn to say, I can't do that because I've set the priority of I'm going to go to my daughter's volleyball game, or I promised my older son I would babysit this weekend, or whatever. And those things fulfill me in terms of recharge the batteries, where I'm not every day sitting there thinking about going through Twitter, finding out what political statements someone's make. Like everything, the fulfilling part of my family and friends is still the what I want to say, the breadth of how I can get the energy to keep doing. And I think that's probably the same with anybody who's working. If you have a good support system, you can say no when you need to, and then set your priorities. That's pretty much how I approach it.
And you want that for others.
I do. And it's not easy for the single mother who has a mid to low income job. She's trying to get by, and school gets called off. What is she going to do? And these are things that I personally didn't have to deal with because I was the one at home at the time, but I really think about it a lot.
And especially during this time.
Right.
So I have to ask you this. You all get together and talk, just the women.
Right. We do. It drives the men crazy. And we have dinners every other month. Now, COVID's sort of thrown this off a little bit. As a matter of fact, I had one dinner, one of the women will sponsor the dinner. So one of the dinners that I sponsored several years ago, you all helped me with, we had here at the Library of Congress. And I gave out, I believe it was Cookie Roberts' book on First Ladies. And so, but here's the ground rules. Nothing goes out of the room that we talk about. We don't get into any divisive issues at all. And we pretty much don't get into issues. It's a real personal kind of gathering of, how's your family? Where are you traveling? Have you ever been here? How's your staff? How do you deal with this issue? It's very much like you would have if you were, meeting with your church group. It's the same thing. And when we break from that, then the next day, the other 75 of the senators all want to know what we talk about, but we're a code of silence. And we're pretty good at it.
So, but do you ever talk about, though, the legislation or some of the things that you're...
Only the common ground ones. We wouldn't get into, say, since we have such differing opinions on, this is an easy one, abortion, we wouldn't enter that into that arena. Then that would just... It would probably divide the conversations to a point where we wouldn't enjoy as much. I tell you, the vice president had us over to her house last year, and she had actually made the little cheese things that we popped in our mouth, little cheese balls, and she showed us around her home, and there again, it was just a really uplifting evening. But we didn't get into the too serious kinds of talks. We have plenty of opportunity for that.
And so...
We don't have as much opportunity to really get to know each other, sadly.
And so this is a way that you can get to know each other in a different way. So when you do get into those heated conversations and things, you know where the person's coming from.
Right, and you have like you have with other friendships, when when you're pushing too hard or when you need to push harder. If you know somebody better, it helps you to be more convincing, but it's been really fun. It was a tradition that started, I believe, with Kay Bailey Hutchinson and your former senator, Senator Barbara Mikulski, and they started that tradition when I believe there were only 9 of them. I know.
And they were a tight group. So then does the support ever spill over into legislation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Senator Klobuchar and I have done a lot of things on eating disorders, on rural broadband. I did a thing on opioid prescribing with Senator Warren from Massachusetts. We do, I'm using those as examples because that's cross-party lines, but do a lot together. We go to one another, I think, sometimes to be co-sponsors. Senator Baldwin and I have done quite a bit on veterans' health. So there, you find out where the areas are like, and you try to. You don't necessarily say to yourself, "Oh, I want to get another woman on this." It's more like, "I want to start building support," and I know that Dr. Hayden might like this one, so let's go there first, and then we can start building on each side.
Mm-hmm. I also have to ask, do you think it's different from some of the other groups in the Senate? I mean, that the women are together.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a special, I guess I hesitate to go down the avenue of, a lot of us are mothers or we're caretakers for our parents, but that's a commonality that we share. I think I'd shared with you that, I had elderly parents that were aging as I was moving into the Senate, some of the hardest decisions I had to make. And, I knew that my friend Deb Fisher had a mother, her mother's in her 90s. So, we could talk about that in a very safe state. Marsha Blackburn, same thing. She has an elderly mother. Tom Tillis just went to visit his mother. I mean, so these are things that you talk about that you would do in normal, everyday life. It's no different there to be able to find some supports when you're in tough areas of your life or your family life. But I think there is a safe space that we've created by these dinners and by our, I think, natural affinity to take on a lot of things that in families and other ways that need to be.
She called them, and that was something. Gender type things that come up with you in restrooms.
Well, yeah, we had the whole thing with the restrooms over on the House side, and the men had a great restroom, and the ladies, we had one, but it was women's was a little off. It was off Statuary Hall, wasn't close enough. And you know, when we get up to critical mass of 60 or 70 women, and we're on the floor, we need a little bit more space. So I got put on the bathroom committee. It's not in my bio, but we did put a bathroom very close to the chamber so that you could go in and out, because sometimes these votes are rather quick. I'll tell you another funny kind of thing. Now, one of the other rules of when I first came in, and keep in mind this is only 6 or 7 years ago, no sleeveless dresses. Can't show your shoulders. So then comes Senator Sinema with 146 sleeveless dresses.
She's from Arizona.
Arizona, right? Yes, she is. And she came in, I guess, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And there's no telling Senator Sinema no. So she just basically said, I'm wearing this. I have 146 of these, and I don't care. And so she does. And so that big vaunted rule has fallen. Now, the other one is open-toe shoes.
Oh, my.
I know. Horrifying.
Scandalous.
Horrifying. Now, I don't want the men wearing open-toe shoes. Yeah. But, so that one's sort of going by the wayside, too. Now, you can't wear jeans, and that one will probably
Well,
stay.
but that's for everybody.
That's unisex.
But that's for everybody.
That's for everybody.
Right. And it was interesting that that's an extra layer that sometimes women have in terms of dress. That is just totally that. I talk about, I'm a librarian, and so I remember the first time I wore like red nail polish. That was like, oh my God, is everybody looking? Yeah. No, they weren't.
Yeah, right.
You know, they weren't.
Right.
So you have that, and you have the family things. What about how you present yourself?
Well, as you can tell by talking with me, I'm pretty much what you see is what you get type. I'm not real reserved, and I'm not afraid to poke fun at myself. And I find humor is really, really a great way to get through life. If you can laugh a little bit every day, that sure helps. And so presenting myself, I look at it as I can wear a red jacket and he can't. And so, you know, to distinguish yourself, and sometimes just jokingly, if I introduce myself to somebody, maybe I'm out of town, I'm meeting somebody, and they say, oh, we're not going to remember it. You know, we know you're a senator, but we don't remember your name. I say, just Google woman senator, West Virginia. It's me. I'm the only one. And so I see it as a real asset, because I feel like I can talk about the complete experience of legislating, of being chairman of a committee, of taking care of my parents, and share. I mean, certainly I'm not sharing everything, but I mean, by that I mean just be open about it. So I think being a woman in public life today is a total advantage. Totally. And some people would totally disagree with me, but I tend to always look at the good side of things.
Well, it's challenging.
It is, but it's challenging for everybody. I think that as we look at public life now, and you see what you're faced with in terms of social media and the raw feelings and all this, that cuts both ways. I mean, I don't think that's a gender-based sort of opinion. I think that's hitting everybody. And so it's hard. For some reason, everybody thinks they can tell you everything when you're at the grocery store.
Well, I think that's something you have in common when they see you,
exactly.
and they want to tell you about it. And so there have been women in leadership. You mentioned committee chair positions, Speaker of the House. Are there some other areas or ways that you think women need to advance?
Well, I think if you look at the leadership in the Senate, there hasn't been a woman leader of the Senate, president of the Senate. And I think that's another milestone that will be broken, hopefully, in the next, decade or whenever, several years, sooner than that, hopefully. And I think that is because it is the most powerful position, much like Speaker Pelosi's position is in the House. And that hasn't occurred. Woman president, obviously. We have a woman vice president, and that is quite an achievement, and another sort of way to mark off an achievement. I think this to be true, that, and I could use you as an example. If young girls see you in these positions, If a young girl sees a woman astronaut, she might aspire to be an astronaut. If a young girl sees a woman president, she might aspire to be a woman president. But if you never see that, it's not that it's impossible. I just think it makes it less likely to kind of cross their mind.
It's harder to imagine. There's a saying that you hear people say, you can't be it if you can't see it.
Right,
You know?
right.
So you can't see yourself or someone that looks like you. If it's hard to put your face
Put yourself
on that body.
Right, yeah.
And that's what's happening. So, okay, we're going to get a president. We're going to get this
Yeah, we're
leader
gonna get it all.
of the Senate. We're going to do more committees and things like that.
Yeah, and I think if you look at our structures now and where the power is, let's just talk about where is the power in the Senate. The power is in the leadership of either party. The leadership of who's in the majority certainly is the most powerful, but there's power in committees in terms of what you see. Take the Rules Committee, for example, where Amy Klobuchar is the chair of the. So you're controlling things like how many offices I have and where my hideaway is, and things that mean a lot to other senators. So that's a good power dynamic if you're working with people. And you see this. Lisa Murkowski was chairman of the Energy Committee, and that has big and bold implications all across the country. So the committee chairs and leadership are where the power is, but that doesn't mean that when you get on the floor, everybody's got, I always say this, everybody's got one vote, and they said, well, does your vote count as much? I said, my vote counts just as much as Chuck Schumer's vote does, because it's just one vote. Now, getting onto the floor to follow you, maybe a little bit more with him.
Do you think there's a little edge sometimes with women, with people being able to?
I wonder about that. I just had a conversation last night about the end of the president's speech, and this was with another woman senator, and from the Democrat Party. And I said, well, I couldn't really hear. It was weird where we were sitting there, because President Biden kept talking sort of through the applause. You couldn't really hear everything that he was saying. And at the end, he's like raising his voice, and he's like trying to pump everybody up, and we're a great country, and this is what you want your president to do. I'm not being critical of what he was saying, but he was kind of almost yelling. And so I asked her, the other senator, I said, well, what if that was one of us up there like yelling? And she goes, well, that would never work. We would be characterized as being very shrill if we did that. So there's still that underlying.
That's
how are you
what's
gonna be
that and
interpreted?
everything. I just have to share this. I went to a debate one time. I saw different candidates, and it was interesting. The male candidates had their water, thing, but the female had to drink out of a cup.
Oh.
Because how would that look if the woman was swigging out of a water bottle? And I thought, oh, okay, I never even thought about that. But
Well, somebody told me one time, when you speak, and I do this all the time, they told me not to do this, but I do it all the time, don't put your hands like this and then have a picture, because you look like a witch. No, I don't know what a man would look like if he's doing this.
But it takes,
apparently I'd look like a witch.
It's that extra layer that I think do you ever talk to women that want to get into public service and things about some of the extra considerations as a woman?
Well, I think yes and no. I think that at the bottom line, at this level, you have to have an incredibly hard shell, whether you're a male or a female, or you can't get up in the morning. The barrage of people that disagree with you, or the time and the effort that it takes, you get weary, and then you get more sensitive. You just have to. That was the beauty for me growing up. Going back to the first question, was I was able to observe this in my parents, how you have to be able to slough things off. Not to say you don't care, but get up in the morning and start over again. And develop that kind of tough shell. And that, I think, is the most important. I think for some women, that is probably a harder thing. And I hate to characterize, because for some women it's not. For some men it's harder. But that's a hard part of our job, is to be able to stay focused, stay on where you want to go, and try to balance the criticisms that can be quite harsh from time to time.
Do you ever hold back about being angry or being
sure.
forceful?
Sure.
But sometimes
Sometimes you got to let them know who's in charge. This is where your mothering skills come very much in, at least mine do anyway. You got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, you have to have people know that, you know, I'm pretty even-keeled. I don't get too upset, but when I do, I get very upset. And people know it. I don't have to like yell and scream or anything, but you can tell. Same with you.
well, and it's a woman sometimes that comes into your management style, and that's what you talked about. What's seen as forceful in a male might seem, as you said, shrill or just overbearing. And it's interesting to talk with young women that are getting into the positions or thinking about it, about some of these. And then there's a generational thing too.
Right. Well, I'm thinking now that my husband Charlie, if I have an instance like that where things aren't really going the way I'm thinking they should or what, and I'm expressing this to that person, he calls it being in Shelley jail. He goes, "I've been in Shelley jail."
It's not a good place.
It's not a good place to be.
And sometimes you have to interact with your male colleagues like that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, they get it. I mean, it's much more because we hold the same power on the floor of the vote. Look how closely divided we are right now. Everybody's vote counts probably more than any time I've ever been there, one way, especially in contentious issues. So it doesn't become he's a man, she's a woman, so we're going to approach them differently. It doesn't really get into that. I don't perceive that to be that. It's more hardcore politics.
Mm-hmm. And women can
yeah.
participate in that quite well.
Mm-hmm. Right, quite well.
And having families and things too, because especially if you had, how many children?
3 children, 7 grandchildren.
Okay. You know how to...
I think I do, but you know, I don't have all the keys to I know what works for me and how to deliver a message. I'll put it that way.
And delivering the message, when we talked about presentation a little bit and how you present, are you conscious of how do you ever change how you present based on the audience?
Of course I do. I mean, I think everybody does, or if they're successful in relaying a message. You know, sometimes have you been to a speech where you listen to somebody talk about something and you say to yourself, they're not reading their audience. And I think that's more how I would calibrate what I would say, you know, rather than how I would say it. Although that you know, if I'm in a group of friends or people that know you well, because you sort of, you know that they know what you're thinking and what your normal life is like, and they might be saying, oh, she's not really presenting herself exactly this. I'm more nervous around people that I know. If I'm in a, like this morning, I was talking to a whole group of people I had never met before, with the exception of maybe 2 or 3, very relaxed, because I'm right on my ground of talking about. There, I think, is a knowledge is good pieces of advice for me. One of them was always know more than the other person in the room on the topic you're talking about. And I wouldn't say I do that all the time, but it does help to know your topic and know your audience. That's how I calibrate how I would present.
And it doesn't.
So with a virtual audience, it's kind of hard.
Well, it is, and sometimes you don't get the feedback.
Right.
Now, you mentioned your mom earlier,
Yes.
and I wondered, as you think about other women in your life who either you looked up to or you thought or had some influence on you, were there others?
Yes, of course. Now, my mother she was a math major, and she taught school, and she was a great support, as I said, to my father. But she was also, for me, just taught me unconditional love for our family. She worried more than my dad, and then now my husband's the worrier in our house, but so I didn't get that trait. But so she really just filled out our lives in such a wonderful way, because my dad was gone a lot because he was really good. and hard. But she taught me so much about the institute. You would have thought I would have known it. You know, your dad's in Congress. Don't you know all this? Well, I found out, no, I don't. And she taught me a lot about that and taught me, she was a really strong woman. And I admired that in her. And think about that as I think back on the times of how I aspired to this. I also think both of my parents were sort of gender neutral in terms of you can be anything you want. We weren't categorized to be one thing or the other. I have a brother and a sister, so you know they had some of each, and they were both very supportive of whatever areas that you might want to go into. So I didn't have that kind of burden. I think a lot of some people are, and maybe this is a generational thing too. Well, you know, you're a woman, you're going to be a teacher or a nurse, and certainly that was my mother's generation, and so I didn't have that pressure of that. So, you know, other women, I am a big sports fan. I love tennis. I love, you know, Billie Jean King. She came to my office. I got to meet her. Chris Evert. I love, you know, I was in that era of female athletes. I have a great admiration for that and the discipline that it takes, and mental and physical. So I have, you know, probably friends that I have a great friends that can, and I can't even explain to you, but this people that are just to their core so incredibly generous, that give of themselves all the time. And I think sometimes I put my head on my pillow at night and think, maybe I should give a little more, you know? And so I love those kind of people because they get me going to want to give more. And so you get your inspiration from a lot of
maybe that's what their gift is, to help you.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
That's good.
That's okay. What about in the Senate? Now, you mentioned Kay Bailey Hutchins.
Kay, well, I didn't serve with her.
But you...
she was gone. I have been inspired by somebody like Senator Feinstein, who is probably the senior woman senator in the Senate right now. She's just unfortunately lost her husband. But she is a most gracious woman. And, you know, we don't have a lot of political beliefs that are the same, but you would never know. You know, she wants to know, you know, how are you? And I asked her one time, you know, her husband had been ill. I said, how is he and how are you? And she said, well, you know, he's struggling. She says, but, you know, how are you? That's the kind of person that, you know, I want to try to be like. I want to try to, you know, care about people the way she does. So she's a big inspiration, I think, to all of us who are sort of her junior senators. And, you know, I like that. There's a couple senators on both sides of the aisle that, you know, are core believers. They have real core beliefs, whether it's real liberal core beliefs or real conservative core beliefs. I'd say Marsha Blackburn, real core conservative belief. Elizabeth Warren, real core liberal beliefs. And I have an admiration for them because I like seeing that core. Sometimes, and I'm sure I don't have to tell you who and how, because it happens everywhere, there's the little finger in the air, what am I going to do? With those two, you don't have to wonder, pretty much. And I have admiration for that. So there's all kinds of different ways. Deb Fisher and I are very good personal friends. We talk about a lot of different things together. And we travel together, too. That's a nice way to get to know people.
What happens when you travel on a Codella, right? And that's an opportunity to get to know all of your colleagues.
Yes, and you can take your spouses usually. There's just so everybody knows, we don't pay for the spouse's hotel. It's in the room and all that comes with us. So extra expenses and everything, those are personal expenses. But it's a good way to get to know as couples, and that's a really good thing because that completes the person, I think. And when you travel and you're on a plane for 12 and 13 hours, you know, you play hearts and watch movies.
Get to know, and you share snacks and things
walk around,
like that.
And so that's good.
Yeah, because the library has a series of things for Congress, the Congressional Dialogues, and one of the features is being able to bring a partner or spouse, and you see the camaraderie and unlikely pairings almost.
Unlikely pairings, and those have gotten, the last one I came to before COVID more and more people. They've just found out how so interesting they are. So thank you for doing that. I know Mr. Rubenstein is a big benefactor of that. You're starting those back up.
We're starting in a couple of weeks with Susan Eisenhower.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Talking about her grandfather, and that's something. And the other thing about that, and the reason why so many members enjoy them, is that those opportunities they used to have to socialize personally in the time you've been.
And you don't do that much anymore. Most people race to go back home. And for a lot of different reasons, both spouses are working in a lot of cases, and in the 50s and 60s that wasn't the case. You know, Mom was with us and could accommodate his schedule, and that was our life. That's what we did, and it was fun. We got to know a lot of different members.
So the women's dinners and things almost help.
Well, they
with
do,
that.
because it can be kind of a lonely existence sometimes when you're here by yourself, and you know, you knock off at maybe 6:30 or 7, and you know, you don't really have a core friendship, you know, group. So these dinners really do fill that void.
Good.
Yeah.
Because as things are coming back, and this is in person, but also you know, virtual, and I still have hybrid programming, it is good to have that connection.
Oh, it
because
definitely
when times get tough, you need to have that.
We do, and it's I just applaud them for starting the tradition. It's been wonderful. It's been continued. It's fun, and you know, we just enjoy one another's company. And you know, you don't have to go if you don't want to go, don't go.
And so, but you've had like almost 100%.
Yes.
Going, even in the tough times.
Yes.
Have you ever had a dinner that, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, was timed after some pretty contentious?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, and we went, you know, I'm trying to think, when we went to the vice president's house, there was something really going on at that point, and we were all there. I think maybe there might have been one or two that didn't come, but it wasn't any kind of
It wasn't
avoidance.
because of what it was. It
Yeah.
was that. And so did that help, that after a particularly kind of rough day, and
Yes.
everybody...
It
that you
definitely
all-
helps. And, you know, if you like to drink wine, a little glass of wine doesn't hurt either.
Well, you can discuss the events of the day.
Yes.
That could help, but to be able to have that, and there's that
It
whole idea of,
definitely-
look, we put the ball down, you know, we're that,
Right.
but now let's also, what do we have in common? And you've built, because sometimes it seems if you can build that trust before times get hard, it's much easier.
And that's what we've done. And that's, you know, you feel like a body of 100 feels like not that many people. But at the end of the day, you can't be friends with 99 people all the time. I mean, you can be acquaintances and all that, but it's nice to sort of narrow it down to a natural narrowing, and that's what the women's dinners do. And we enjoy each other. We, you know, like every female, we meet up in the, you know, when we're in the restroom and have the conversation about, you know, do you have a comb or whatever? And, you know, life is pretty normal most of the time.
So we hope that there will be more women getting into public service. And if you had to give some...
To young women, maybe college-age women, is if you think you're interested in this, you have to sort of tiptoe, I think, into it. In other words, get involved with a campaign, find an issue you're interested in, find a candidate you like, just to sort of follow along to see what the process is like. Because campaigning and serving are two different things. There's a lot of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences. You have to be able to self-promote. And that's hard for people if it's not a totally natural thing. It's a learned skill. You have to learn it. And so that I think if you watch a race and see what another woman's doing, you might be interested that way. The other thing I tell them is to perfect your communications. I could, you know, deliver a speech sometime really important. And I think negotiation and consensus, reaching consensus and being able to negotiate are going to lead to success. I think we can all have our, you know, strident positions, but at the end of the day, if what you really want to do is do something good for the country or a certain segment of the people, You've got to reach consensus, and you have to realize that there's other people who have voices in the room. And then I would tell my colleagues, too, you've got to respect opposing voices. This is what we've gotten away from, and I think it discourages young people from getting into it because they see this caustic sort of battle, and they think, why would I want to do that? That doesn't even, it looks mean, and it doesn't even look like they get anything done. And so I think this respect issue and civility issue is something that is a constant challenge, and we need to work on it more.
What about the give and take then with the negotiating? So if you have one thing that you're going into it, and there are a lot of other aspects of it, but there's this one thing that's your drop dead thing, that you might be able to give a little on something else.
Right.
Is that?
Well, that's a strategy of negotiating, and I'm sure, in business, I'm sure this is what people do, executives. And in politics, sometimes you're not going to get this whole thing, but if you hold on it tight enough, you're going to maybe get something, and then all of a sudden you come in and go, well, okay, I guess I can do that. And so, like, we're in the middle of that right now with our Appropriations Committee. I'm the ranking member of Homeland Security. Very contentious very contentious issues that are, and Chris Murphy is the chairman. And so we're trying to figure, these are things like the wall and ice beds, and these are not how much, fertilizer should you have in an ag community. These are, which can be contentious, but not like this. And so we're in the middle of negotiating. And then you have to decide, what is your will? Is your will to get it done, or is your will to just stir it up and try to get it done next year? So you can make those calculations.
And where do you get your counsel on that?
Well, luckily, that's one thing that we have wonderful staffs, large staffs that, you give everybody a subject area, and they go to town on it. And then I have regional reps in my state, which I'm sure every senator does. So that's sort of the ear to the ground. What are West Virginians thinking about this? I go home all the time, so I don't really feel disconnected at all. But in certain areas, what's incoming, But there again, it's trying to figure out, are these incoming from people that you really know? I'm talking about emails or not faxes anymore, mostly emails or texts or and so or postings on your Facebook or whatever. You have to decide, are these things that really matter, or is this just sees me post something he writes, she's a communist or something? You have that all the time.
And usually very vigilant about
you might have
expressing that quite a bit. So absorbing information, because I'm a librarian, I got to ask,
right.
How do you work on that? I know you get briefing books and you do that.
Well, I've always been fascinated by the current events, so news. So I read a lot of newspapers, my local one. I'll read some of the Washington Post, not cover to cover. I'll go to the front part and then the crossword in the style section, and food, which is today, I think, is the food section. And then, I'll read my, I must admit, I read Twitter a lot because I think you get a lot of, and that links you to a bunch of different articles. I do tell my young students, the younger students that I meet, that learning to read is so critical. I had a really good teacher, Mrs. Cromwell, in second and third. I actually had her 2 years in a row. That's back when they split classes. You have half the second grade and half the third grade together. I don't think they do that anymore. No. But anyway, so I had her in second grade, and then when they split classes, she wanted me again, so she took me in third grade. And she was wonderful at teaching to read. So I learned to read well, but I also learned to read fast and comprehend enough to get by. I know I'm talking to a librarian.
I do that too. You skim.
Right, I was skimming. And so I do a lot of that. I do rely on, I do watch some television news, but all the different immigration visa statuses and everything. And so, I'll ask them, and they'll generate a report from the Congressional
Research Service.
And that will give me a deeper dive into something that I feel like I need to know more about. And so, we have briefings. We have secret briefings, classified briefings. We just had one on Ukraine and Russia. So there's always available. We can always call experts, subject experts. to brief not just me, but like I had the credit unions in today, so they're telling me all their issues, the local. So there's no problem getting information.
It's how do you sort through it? How do you absorb it? The Kluge Center, for instance, does things not only public programming, but the type of reference and experts that are available to Congress too. Same thing. And the Congressional Research Service, they're the SWAT teams of,
they are great.
Info. They told me they were working 24/7 this past weekend.
Really?
With supporting in terms of getting information in that. So you're balancing that. Now you mentioned crossword puzzles and food. So you have time for that too?
Well, that's my go-to-bed thing, is the crossword puzzle. And I'm doing Wordle, I must admit. Yes, I got the one today. I bombed out 2 days ago, and I was pretty upset about that. But I enjoy true. I just always liked them.
Yeah, and it's a way to keep your mind going without thinking about stuff.
Yeah,
and that.
Yeah, when it gets to the end of the week, it gets harder. If you do them,
Well, when you think about women and leadership, and especially in Congress, which is, I think, one of the most, I'd say, significant ways of serving and being part of the legislative body, you see a bright future. What do you see in like 2040 or 2045?
I thought about that coming over here. What would be a considered a moving up or moving on? I don't want to say victory, because that's not what you're trying to do. So more numbers. When I first came in, there were 57 women in the House. I think there's 120, I think, now. There were only 7 of us that had children under the age of 18, and now we have Senator Duckworth had the first baby in the Senate. Senator Kathy McMorris Rogers has had 3 children, and others have had children. So, that was sort of considered unusual, and now it's, of course, they're young women and they want to be moms, and so that goes on. So those kinds of marks. So I don't know, if we get to a certain halfway, if there are 50 women senators, is that where you stop? I don't see it like that. I think it's a constant growth. I don't think there's a number. I think that there's you want those young girls that I see in my little program that I do at home to be able to aspire and think that this is something they could do, but it doesn't necessarily have to be what they should do, but just as one of the possibilities. So I think probably more numbers, more leadership position for our women, and we try to mentor a lot. When I first started in the Congress in 2001, Deb Price from Columbus, Ohio, she was a real mentor to me. She kind of took me under her wing. She was in leadership, and she helped me a lot. So I remember that. And so when it came along, and Martha Roby came to Congress in 2010, I kind of took her under my wing. And we're really good friends today. So both of them are good friends of mine. So I think that's important too, to promote other women and women's success.
Well, when you were saying it'd be enough and everything, one of our audience members was saying, no, it's not enough.
No.
So you should know.
75, 100.
There's an appetite for seeing what the difference might be.
Maybe that's where it is. I don't know where that. I guess my point in that is, if we got to 50, I don't think everybody goes, okay, well we're half the population, plenty. I'm not sure that's the answer. Maybe it's 75. Maybe it's 100.
Well, you certainly are a role model.
Well, thank you.
For so many. You mentioned that program that you have.
Yes.
You could tell me a little bit.
Sure. Well, that was the program that we were going to do in West Virginia. We were going to go to elementary school, and I was going to, you were going to be Exhibit A on how you could be the librarian of the Congress, the first woman librarian, and unfortunately, something happened that day, and we couldn't.
It was,
the
flood,
flood,
I can't
wasn't
remember.
It?
That might have been.
Yeah. So we had to cancel that, and that's when we sort of rejiggered our schedule. So I have this program called West Virginia Girls Rise Up. First question of where do you make your impacts, and what kind of influence did your parents, getting into this? I could see my daughter was I could see me being approached of, your dad got, lights on the football field, or your dad helped me, my son was in Vietnam and he wasn't writing me letters and he found out where he was and got him on the phone. Things like that he was able to do as a congressman. And I thought, what would I want my daughter to hear about me? And I thought, I would like my daughter to hear that your mother came to my class when I was in 5th grade, and that really inspired me to run for mayor of my city, or president of the United States, or be head of the company, or be the fire chief, or whatever. But just to have a memory of an active woman leader and sort of demystify the position. So I started this, and we have 3 sort of stools: education, physical well-being, and then confidence. And then I get them to talk, and then we have, it's about 45 minutes, and we talk about some famous women, and then we talk, sometimes I bring a guest, as I was trying to bring you. I brought an astronaut, and our great fire chief, Jan Rader from Huntington, came. And so, we'll do different things to sort of change it up. The West Virginia University gymnastics team came with me one time. And so the girls really like it. They like to talk about their dreams and to talk about what does it mean to be confident. And because, if you talk about what is something you need on the Senate floor, well, yeah, we're all one vote. But if you're lacking in confidence, it makes it a little bit harder. You have to try to be, or at least project confidence, and be confident. And so that's what we talk about. And they understand, they've thought about this. So anyway, I'm hoping someday
we're going to do it.
Some young girl comes up to my daughter and said, I saw your mom at Girls Rise Up, and it really made a difference.
Because you remembered the names of the teachers.
Yep.
And I don't think people realize the impact that they have. So I do want to come and be part, because I think a librarian following an astronaut would be pretty cool.
It's interesting. We asked her, when did she decide that she wanted to become an astronaut? Her name, and Peggy Whitson is her name. She's done the most spacewalks of any astronaut.
Really?
And she said she saw them land on the moon when she was in 2nd grade, and that's when she decided. She got turned down 4 times, and then she did it.
Well,
So
we're being joined by one of your
Yes.
colleagues.
We served together for 14 years.
14 years.
How are you?
Well, thank you. We said that
Why don't we
Congresswoman
No, we're good.
Sheila Jackson Lee was busy voting.
Well, Dr. Hayden has been talking to me for 45 minutes, or at least. So she.
Well, one of the things, and thank you, because we really got into the types of things that we wanted to also share during this Women's History Month. And I just have to encourage everyone, on your way out, the Library of Congress has the archives of Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Mary Church Terrell, all of the pioneers of the women's suffrage movement. And we had a wonderful exhibit during the thing, and we have the commemorative booklet for you all on your way out, because it shall not be denied. 70 years to get women to vote. Wonderful. And then there's a new copy, and I would lift this up, but it is super heavy. It's like a doorstop, but it's the Women of the Congress, and it just came out. And you have that in both of the stores,
right,
at the House of Representatives and the Congress. So it's hot off the presses.
Great.
So, Congresswoman, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you so very much for having me.
It's
been a long day.
Yes, a long day.
Still more to come.
This might not be then, but I am going to ask you, it's a long day, but how did you get here? Your history.
That's a dual question. How did I get to this building right now? Being prepared and having a bus for me, obviously. But they were in 1s and 2s because, the names that I remember, of course, are Shirley Chisholm, Barbara Jordan, but there was Lindy Boggs. We have started, was a...
Thank you.
Thank you. Sheila, it's great to see you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
And I'll move on down.
Now you can get the grilling.
Yeah, we're going to go all the way back.
I love it. Should we do musical chairs, or should I move?
I think they want me to move over, but I will. I have apparatus on, So that
This
makes
probably
it correct.
this wrecks havoc on the
Yes.
video. I
Oh,
hope they're
well,
editing.
they're very
Streaming,
good.
I
They're
let me
very good.
apologize to
So
the viewers.
ones and twos, and you mentioned Lindy Boggs, who replaced for women to get into Congress. They replaced
Was.
their spouses.
In many instances, and then of course, if we went over the list, there were a lot of women who came in. You know, I remember the senator from New Jersey. She was clearly a out of the box person, way back in the 50s. So we've had the ones and twos, but the numbers really came in 1992, the year of the woman. It really was, relatively speaking, the year of the woman. That's when Karen Mosley Brown was elected to the United States Senate.
The first.
And then there was a decent amount of women elected to the United States House. The numbers were still very small. I think my journey was really, it was not a journey that would lead to the United States Congress. I mean, I can go back and start talking about these things like running for student government in middle school and being sort of an aberration there. I actually became the student government president of all the student governments in the city of New York.
Whoa.
13. That was, now, was I thinking about Congress? Absolutely not.
Well,
that
maybe
was not,
so now. If you were doing that at 13, you
that was,
had a
that was
plan.
not even in my window. But it was a kind of activism, or let's be engaged in the civic process. Shirley Chisholm was active during that period of time. But then on to high school, and so that you all won't think that I'm a relic. But in high school, when I wanted to run for vice president, the boys said, you cannot run for vice president of the student government. You have to run for secretary. And to those who are in the audience, don't be dismayed. And we had a red and blue party. I did run for secretary. But it was a life-changing experience. I ran because we were on a ticket, and so I took one for the ticket. XYZ boy was running for vice president, and I had to take that spot. And so I remember it vividly. I remember being asked not to run for, so there goes the beginning gubernatorial or governmental experience, not governor, and then on to college, and then the unevenness. There was leadership, and then there were worker bees. We fell into the worker bee category. Yeah, we fell into the worker bee category. But I was also someone sort of engaging in the things that were unique and that I wanted to do. So, you know, I competed against them in oratorical contests and won, to the dismay of the defeated male. I couldn't understand how I could win and beat him. And these were experiences, I think, that carried through in those early years. And obviously, it's not the 1800s, but it was certainly some earlier years when it really was a dichotomy between what women were expected to be able to accomplish. I was a pioneer with my name, Sheila Jackson Lee. So Lee is my married name. I refuse to give up my maiden name. That was a big deal in that era. You can calculate the eras of the 70s and 80s. It was a big deal to keep three names. You know, are you going to, and then it was a big deal about whether you hyphenated, et cetera, et cetera. But I've insisted, I'm on the board in Congress, Sheila Jackson Lee. I insist that you make sure that, and so my voting name is Sheila Jackson Lee. But I say that to say that things have evolved, that women were considered in a certain place. And so I continue to be a person that wanted to serve. I obviously liked being involved in government from student government on, and that's very unique that you would cast that as your beginning. But it was, and I admired persons like Shirley Chisholm, like Barbara Jordan, but like Bella Abzug, who was a
In New
real,
York, right?
Yes, a real whippersnapper, if you will, and Eleanor Roosevelt, who was someone who really achieved a feisty type of life, and then on to law school. So once you get in law school, you have a whole different mindset, and that was to be a judge. So it was never to be a person in the public, civic, elected life. You get into law school and you are ascending to one bench after another. That's the beauty of loving the law and doing that. In my law school, there were 3 African American women and probably 1 or 2 others. It was most of the law schools at that time frame had very few women. And so we haven't really made the real home runs until as we moved into the late 1990s, into the 2000s. We have obviously made a seismic change in the United States Congress with over 100 women, which is extremely positive. Now, that's the world I live in now. But women still have, I think, places to be. I'd like to see us as more corporate CEOs, more members of the boards of corporations. We have yet to become president of the United States.
The senator mentioned that as well.
Yet to become president of the United States. I think we are still needing to achieve that. And just look at the pandemic. I'm sort of going off the point, but just look at the pandemic. Statistically and sociologically, women were the most devastatingly impacted with the pandemic. We're still trying to get women back into the workforce. Women had to come out. Children were out of school. Child care was at a premium. You couldn't find it or you couldn't pay for it. And so it still shows the contrast that occurs between men and women. And of course, we have family medical leave now, and men are taking care of children. There are single parents who happen to be men. So I don't want to disregard that men are engaged more than they've ever been. But if you look at different types of history, you'll find that we still have some many miles to travel in the course of the full equality. We're fighting in the Congress to pass what I think should be bipartisan is the enhancement of child care. So you can bring down the cost that it doesn't cost any more than 7% of your income. Can you imagine, even if you were a single parent and you happen to be a woman, the idea of child care being half of your income is pretty stark, particularly if you have other children besides those who need to have child care. So I constantly have as my legislative agenda to ensure that every legislative initiative you look to see what amending can do to create a better, a more effective impact on the lives of women in America. I wanted to make sure that I voted on this last amendment.
Yes.
This last amendment by Congresswoman Brownlee and Miller Meeks dealt with the larger bill, which was dealing with veterans. You never want to not vote on something dealing with veterans. And it dealt with the impact of the toxicity of the burns that they would do in war, mostly in Iraq and Afghanistan. I would go there and they'd have the big burn pits and all of the things that had to be burned, and it was enormously toxic and never diagnosed. But in any event, this last amendment indicated that there should be more mammograms available to women veterans because they too were impacted by toxic.
Breast cancer.
You know, just you think of these things that add to creating a better life for women. So that sort of goes a roundabout way.
Right, and being a woman. So, but also I want to go back to that turning point for you. You're in law school. Were you in Yale? I know you went to Yale.
Yale undergrad. I was at University of Virginia Law School.
Okay. And when did you make that turn to say, I'm not going for the judgeship?
I never did. I went on to practice law right here in Washington, D.C. with a major administrative law firm, which means that we practice in front of all the agencies. That's another story as well. When I came to practice, even though there were women in law firms, I think I might have been the good news was I was the only associate that came in, I think, that year. And so I was a woman, but I was obviously and am a woman, young associate hired out of law school. But the firm was really predominantly male. And I was driven to prove myself. And we had a major employment litigation in the federal courts. And any of you practiced in the old days, they had these gigantic suitcases of documents. So
Sometimes on wheelies later.
that's correct. And I made sure that I was the one that carried them, but I think they made sure that I was the one that carried them. It was just things like that, that you felt that you had to be one of the boys. You had to not have anybody trying to do anything for you. So in those early years, I still didn't deviate from what I ultimately wanted. I took a stint up here on the Hill from the law firm here in Washington, and worked on the assassination committee of yesteryear, the one that reinvestigated the John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King assassinations. And I thought I had the dream job, and I really did. But I still, all the way, went through dealing with this question of ascending to the judgeship. When I relocated to Houston, Texas, which now I've lived more than half of my life, I went to a law firm, and so there was no stepping away from what you would do next would be to be on the bench. But ultimately, in the course of life, I did get on the bench, but a tragic loss of life of a name that you would know, Congressman Mickey Leland.
Oh, yes.
Who died in a plane crash in Ethiopia, triggered a series of opportunities. Person in one position wanted to run for his position, never had a black woman on, and that was in 1989. So that is quite recent, but quite a while back. They'd never had a black woman, and very few women of any kind. They certainly had not had a Hispanic woman. And I think there might have been one white woman on the Houston City Council. They were not welcoming, to say the least.
Well, here we are at the start of Women's History Month, but we just concluded the celebration of Black History Month, and you were both. And I know that.
And that's what happened. That's what happened.
And so in terms of being in Congress and is it a dual role?
You know,
how do you see
that's
it?
a very good question. You do wear many hats. And it's interesting that both hats that you wear have their own independent journeys. I think that I like to view myself, and I enjoy representing a very eclectic, diverse, but richly, evenly dispersed, distributed members from the Anglo, Caucasian community, Hispanic, African American, Asian, in Houston, Texas. We are a very diverse community. And I consider myself a patriot. So that means that you have to represent the American people as well. And they are very diverse, and they're east, west, north, and south. But in doing so, I have a strong affinity for social justice issues. I'm on the Judiciary Committee, and I've been there since I got elected to the United States Congress. That is a long time. And I believe it is important to make the law and make that you have to cure some of the continuing discriminatory practices by law and by social affinity. And so I work hard on that. At the same time, we work as caucus members, as a women's caucus, that we work as Republicans and Democrats, and as a Democratic caucus, and we look at everything from the disparities in health care for women and the disparities in black maternal mortality rate. And we get women, I think I've even mentioned it, the establish and socialize that 246 years of slavery, and how is it transcended in the 21st century. You know, that's a really far out social justice that you have to really get people to understand that it's not yesteryear, it's not why are you bringing that up again. It is a repeat that will fill this library with major documentation, even more than you have, which I would want that commission, once its work is finished, to lodge its materials and its work for others to come to understand that era and how it is impacted even today. So those are far-reaching. On the other hand, I'm dealing with cybersecurity, the intelligence, what you can do to improve the lives of women, because you are historic in that you still have not been in the Congress long, even though I've had some tenure. There are new members coming in that are in 2 and 3 and 4 years. So you try to do it where
you can
wear 2 hats.
Well, we just appreciate in the Kluge Center in particular you making it over here, because we knew it was getting a little tough when you're voting and you're doing it, but you said you really wanted to make the time to come, and I hope that you know that we appreciate it, and there's more to the month, so we'll get you over here. And if just a parting thing though, if you had any words of advice for young women who are thinking about public service, who might be in law school, might be in library school, might be anywhere, but just a few words to leave us with.
I think it's good to, and you're in public service, and we're so honored for you to be uniquely in this position, the first, and as a woman, and followed a man. So as a woman and a woman of color, you are in fact unique, and I don't know whether or not you had a direct dream or wish to be, and you may have, but
no,
maybe not.
No.
Maybe not.
No,
I knew I was right.
my
I don't know
wasn't
if,
my
and
plan.
I felt that you did not. But let me just say to women and to young women, I could say something trite, and I wouldn't want you to think it was trite, of follow your dream. That's one way of giving advice. But it is clear that many of us did not start out with the dream of which we are now in. And so what I'd like to offer is never doubt yourself. Do the best at what you're doing. There's several ways of ascending to positions. One, you are directly focused and you have building blocks and you are networking with people and you're getting phone numbers and now emails, more sophisticated, or you're getting their Instagram, or you're on LinkedIn. Or it is that you are prepared and someone notices you and tells you, this is what I think you should do. Of course, they engage you to see whether or not you're interested. When the congressional position came up in my community, it was because Mickey Leland had died, and someone else, my entry into an elective position, he died and someone else was running for his position, not me at that time, and I went on to the city council. But take notice, as a member of the city council, again, one of the first women, and certainly first woman of color, I ran for Congress. So it was a time when there were community people that said, you can do this. I want young women to know that the best way to achieve their dreams is, one, to not only have the dream, but also to be prepared if someone else comes and says, you would be perfect for this. Civic participation is crucial, and I always think, seek out intergenerational relationships. Find us. We're eager to be engaged, to be able to give the insight of our journey, but also take a moment to pause. Sometimes it happens where you can leap to a position. Many people think that is the route to take. I think the route to take is getting seasoned. No, I'm not saying get to. May come with a completely different idea because you're prepared, and you will view that as a wake-up call. You know what? That is something I would like to do. That is a place that I'd like. So don't doubt yourself. Be prepared. Engage in civic-minded activities that are not necessarily through the election. And, of course, make a difference by the service that you give to others. And you'll be amazed at how far you can go.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman, for sharing your journey with us.
Look at you.
We really appreciate it and taking this time during Women's History Month. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for waiting
a
little bit.
You were voting. we were going to wait. So thank you so much, and thank all of you for being here and for being with us today.